The cowboy named Trace had a memory that recorded every single touch he had ever felt. He remembered his mother's last hug when he was 5, and she smelled of lilac and flower. He remembered the vet's gloved hand on his horse's flank and the exact pressure of the needle. He remembered a stranger's accidental elbow on a bus when he was 17 in Billings. Trace could not forget any touch, and his mind was a library of skin and pressure and temperature. Most people found him creepy when he described their grandmother's hands or their father's calluses. He retreated to his Montana ranch and wore gloves to avoid collecting any new tactile memories. A forensic anthropologist named Relic came to study old cowboy bones found on his property. She wore brown leather gloves and carried a silver ring that had belonged to her dead grandmother. Relic knelt beside a grave, and her glove slipped, and her bare finger touched Trace's bare wrist. He inhaled sharply and closed his eyes and said, "Your gloves are brown leather with a small scar on the left thumb." Relic pulled her hand back and said, "How could you possibly know that? You were not looking at my gloves." Trace opened his eyes and said, "I remember every touch. Your skin touched my skin for 1 second. I know everything about that second." He described her grandmother's ring in perfect detail, including the tiny scratch from a wedding band in 1972. He described her mother's hands holding hers at age 9 with the exact pressure of nervous encouragement. Relic began to shake because no living person knew about her grandmother's ring except her own memory. She asked him to close his eyes, and she touched his palm with her bare finger for 3 seconds. Trace said, "You are scared but curious. Your pulse is fast. Your finger is cold, but your palm is warm. You have not been held in months." Relic wept because he had just described her loneliness without her saying a single word about it. She removed her gloves completely and placed both hands on his face and said, "Tell me what you remember now." Trace closed his eyes and said, "Your hands are small but strong. You have a scar on your right thumb from a knife. You were chopping onions." He continued, "Your grandmother taught you to cook." She held your hand over the knife and said, "Slow down, little bird." Relic sobbed because her grandmother had called her little bird, and she had never told anyone that nickname. She asked him if he could feel emotions through touch, and he said, "No, only texture, temperature, pressure, and history. But your history tells me you were loved," he said. "Your grandmother's hands were kind. You have her knuckles and her gentleness." Relic sat beside him on the dry grass and said, "I have spent my whole life touching dead bones because living people scared me." Trace said, "Dead bones do not touch back, but I do. And I will remember every time you touch me until I die." She touched his cheek again, and he said, "Callus from a pencil. You write by hand. You press too hard. Your middle finger is sore." Relic laughed through her tears and said, "You are the most invasive person I have ever met, and also the most gentle." Trace said, "I cannot help what I remember, but I can choose what I say, and I choose to tell you that your touch is kind." She moved into his guest cabin, and every day she experimented with his gift by touching him in different ways. She tapped his shoulder, and he said, "You are asking for attention. You are nervous." Your finger hesitated. She hugged him for 5 seconds, and he said, "You have not hugged anyone in 7 years. Your arms forgot the shape of a man." Relic cried because 7 years ago her fiancé had died in a climbing accident, and she had stopped hugging everyone. Trace held her back and whispered, "This hug feels like you are learning to breathe again. Your ribs are moving differently now." She looked up and said, "You are not just remembering touch. You are reading my soul through my skin." Trace shook his head and said, "No, I am just reading your skin. Your soul is something you will have to tell me with words." Relic told him about her dead fiancé and her dead grandmother and her dead father and the bones she studied that were also dead. Trace listened and then took her hand and said, "Your fiancé's last touch to your hand was gentle. You remember that. I can feel it in your grip." She said, "How do you know that?" And he said, because when I hold your hand, I feel the ghost of his hand underneath mine." Relic pulled away but then slowly placed her hand back because his honesty was brutal and beautiful. She asked him if he ever wished he could forget, and he said, "Every day. But forgetting would mean losing the good touches too." He told her about his mother's last hug and how it still kept him warm on cold nights when he was 60 years old. Relic touched his chest and said, "What do you feel right now?" He closed his eyes and said, "Hope. Your hand is trembling with hope." She had not felt hope in 7 years, and she kissed him without asking permission or calculating the consequences. Trace pulled back and said, "Your lips are dry. You are dehydrated. Also, your kiss tastes like coffee and sadness and something sweet underneath." Relic laughed and said, "You are ruining romance with your catalog of details." He said, "Romance is details. Anyone can say I love you. I can prove it with your mother's thumbprint." He proposed to her on the same grave where their hands had first touched by accident without gloves. Trace said, "I will remember this moment forever. The texture of the dirt, the temperature of the air, the way your pulse jumped when I knelt." Relic said yes and added, "I will remember this moment too, but only because my brain is normal. Yours is a curse that I somehow love." They got married in the cemetery where she studied bones, and he thought it was appropriate because they both touched dead things for a living. His wedding vows were, "I promise to remember every touch you give me for the rest of my life, and to never use that memory against you." Her vows were, "I promise to touch you every day so your library of sensation has more happy volumes than sad ones." Their first dance was a slow sway, and Trace said, "Your left foot is slightly behind your right. You learned to dance from someone who stepped on your toes." Relic laughed and said, "My grandfather taught me. He had 2 left feet." "You just described him perfectly without ever meeting him." Trace said, "I did meet him. He is in your posture. He's in the way you hold your shoulders when you are nervous about a spin." They had 1 daughter, and Trace refused to touch her until she was 3 because he did not want to remember her infant frailty forever. Relic understood, and she held the baby for both of them while Trace watched from across the room with love and fear. When he finally touched his daughter's hand at age 3, he wept because her palm was small and warm and trusting. He said, "She will grow up. She will leave. But I will have this touch forever. Thank you for waiting." The daughter grew up knowing that her father remembered every hug, and she never lied to him because he would feel her deception in her shoulders. She would say, "Dad, I am fine." And he would say, "Your back muscles are tight. You are not fine. Talk to me." She learned that his gift was not a weapon but a door, and she walked through it every time she needed to be seen. Relic developed carpal tunnel at 60, and her hands went numb and she could not feel her own fingers. She cried because she could not touch Trace and feel his memory library respond to her failing nerves. Trace held her numb hands and said, "I remember every touch you ever gave me. I need no new ones. Your old ones will last my lifetime." Relic asked him what her first touch had felt like, and he said, without hesitation, "Cold finger, warm heart, trembling hope. And your grandmother's ghost." She died at 72, and Trace held her hand for 6 hours after her last breath because he wanted to memorize her leaving. He whispered to her body, "Your fingers are cooling. Your pulse is gone. But your skin still smells like the soap you used on our wedding day." Trace survived her by 8 years, and his daughter said he talked to Relic's photograph every morning by touching her painted face. He would say, "The photograph has no texture, but I remember the texture of your real cheek. That is enough." When Trace died at 86, his daughter held his hand and he said, "Your hand is your mother's hand. Same knuckles. Same warmth." He closed his eyes, and his last words were, "I remember everything. But the only touch I need now is the one waiting for me wherever she is." His daughter buried him next to Relic with a small brass plaque that read, "He remembered every touch." She taught him that being remembered is love. Every year, couples leave handprints in clay on their grave, and the clay preserves the texture of their palms for decades. Trace and Relic proved that the most intimate thing is not a kiss or a whisper, but the simple act of being truly felt by someone who never forgets. If you have ever felt invisible or forgotten, find someone who will catalog your touch like a scripture and read it back to you when you doubt your existence. Subscribe to Stories Hub, official, for more emotional Western romances about the skin we live in and the hands that memorize us without permission. Share this video with someone whose touch you would remember, even if you had a brain that forgot everything else in the entire universe.